you reach a point when you're optimizing for channels where trying to increase your click-through rate is actually a battle of diminishing returns.
I'm Lawrence, Managing Director of Bright Blue Day. I'm here talking to Karl, Head of Performance, on the subject of ROI. So Karl, why do you think ROI is more important than ever before for senior marketers?
Yeah, I think probably for two reasons. The first is that over the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen a considerable increase in our ability to attribute and actually measure campaigns accurately. And then the second is that probably more so over the last 4 or 5, we've then seen a lot more economic pressure, obviously rising inflation, and that's then putting pressure on organizations to try and do more with less. Both of those things are then being passed on to marketers who are being forced to try and find ways to create more efficiency with their marketing campaigns.
So we've currently got a perfect storm where we can see with more granularity than ever before what the data is telling us, so we can be accountable for it.
Yep.
But we've also got senior marketers and entire marketing teams really being pushed to deliver and evidence positive ROI across the board against their budgets.
Yeah, absolutely.
We use a lot of acronyms in our industry. Digging into ROI, what's the difference between ROI and ROAS? Because I've heard them used and sometimes interchangeably, and I've not quite understood what the difference is.
Yeah, so the key distinction is that ROAS is return on advertising spend, which is essentially the revenue that you generate from the media spend in platform. So it only compares those two metrics. By contrast, ROI is a far more holistic measure of performance. So marketing ROI includes a multitude of other factors, things like your overheads related to the cost of production of creative, the creation of your landing pages, and potentially even the resource that actually work on that project. So if marketing ROI is your goal, then ROI is a far more effective measure than ROAS to measure holistic performance.
Okay, so now this has another question, because now I understand ROAS. Why would I measure it? Like, we're a cost-effective agency, but if you're looking at a campaign going, well, my creative agency has, charged me hundreds of thousands for a load of assets, use them or not. Yeah. If I'm discounting that at the point I start delivering metrics or evidencing metrics, then I'm removing potentially an awful lot of money from my equation and not attributing it to the actual campaign.
Yeah, I'd say ROAS is still an effective measure for comparing and contrasting platform performance. So if, for instance, you wanted to compare how Meta is performing versus TikTok versus Google Ads, then ROAS gives you a very pure metric where you can compare and contrast how much am I spending and how much am I generating as a result of that spend.
So what does a good ROAS look like for B2B?
So in a B2B context, I wouldn't say there's one right ROAS figure that you should try and chase down or go after. And the reason for that is that the types of solutions or products that you're going to be working with are going to flex quite a lot. For instance, in the B2B space, you're typically working with products that are between £400 and £500 cost per acquisition. And then on the back end, you're potentially selling a solution that is in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. So the ROAS figures are obviously going to be much, much higher than what you'd see, for instance, in a B2C context.
Yeah. So is that the same for B2C?
I'd say B2C is slightly different in the sense that you're working with far lower transaction values, and the goal changes slightly in the sense that you're trying to acquire customers for as little as you can, because obviously your margins are tighter. So one of the things that you need to consider is, can you actually increase average order value at the point of sale by potentially bundling different products or solutions in together? Or you're looking to acquire the customer at the cost of media. So essentially it just washes its face on the assumption that you can then generate multiple sales via email nurture, for instance, and then try and increase customer lifetime value.
Got it. Someone in your team recently talked about less ROAS. Now I understand, positive ROI, the better the ROI, that's all good, but less ROAS seems to be something he was optimizing for, without throwing anyone under a bus. What was he trying to achieve with a less ROAS?
Yeah, so I think people are naturally inclined to try and optimize for the best ROAS figure that they can, and I think it's kind of become a bit of a North Star metric for a lot of organizations. But actually there's some instances where optimizing for ROAS isn't the most effective thing to do. And it really depends on what the goal of the organization is. So for instance, if your goal is to maximize return on investment, then absolutely trying to optimize for ROAS is the right approach. However, if your goal is growth, either in sales or in revenue, then potentially taking a hit on your ROAS in the short term is the right thing to do, because you're going to be able to scale your campaigns a little bit more aggressively and therefore generate the growth that you're looking for.
So it's potentially a trade-off, but it's one the customer needs to understand that we're intentionally doing this. The ROAS won't be the figure you want it to be, but it's while we're finding the headroom to find a new audience before we start to focus on that and narrow down on that.
Yeah, precisely. It's essentially, we scale campaigns in a tiered fashion. So typically we'd look at, for instance, like a 20% increment in scaling up our budget. And what we essentially do at each stage is scale the budget, where we're trying to slightly more aggressively reach new audiences, target new customers, and potentially acquire a slightly higher cost per acquisition. Then we look to stabilize the budget at that level. And once we get to that stage, then we can start to optimize for efficiency again. So it's a constant increase and then stabilize and optimize to try and return to that same level of ROAS at a higher level of media spend.
And under the client understanding that, but also, I suppose, that being the original point, the brief or the strategy, and people buying into, I can either do this or this. They're very different strategies. I'm sure everyone wants both, but it's about picking out and going, that's the even as a short-term strategy, that's what we're doing now until here to achieve that. Yeah,
precisely. I think understanding what the primary goal is at the point of brief is really, really important, so that both the organization and the agency or the marketer in question are aligned on exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve is really important. Because if you try and chase both metrics simultaneously, ultimately your campaigns aren't going to be as effective as you want them to be.
Awesome. I know your team spend a lot of time tracking, analyzing, and reporting, and obviously optimizing. But sometimes there is the question for the client of, is there the value? Do they get value from that?
Yeah, we track a lot of metrics in the team that often the client doesn't actually even see. And the reason for that is we have a bit of a mantra within the team that you can't master what you can't measure. So it's really important for us that we're able to spot trends over time. And so tracking even the most granular metrics is actually really important, because it's those things that are going to help us actually unlock incremental performance improvements, and that's where the ROI is going to come from.
And then in terms of tracking, obviously it clearly has value when you want the results. Are there different ways that you track or different principles of tracking?
Yeah, I'd say that in the current modern world of marketing, we are working more now than ever with imperfect data. So actually being able to aggregate different data sources to understand what's going on from a marketing ROI perspective is really important.
So interesting. When we talk about, the days gone by, we had very little data to track.
Yep.
Now we've got so much of it that it's actually imperfect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that picture is only going to change over, again, the next 18 months. So we've had obviously a number of different organizations introduce cookieless browsers, and Google have obviously pushed their date back twice already. That is now imminent. That is going to change the shape of our ability to do things like remarketing and to be able to track and attribute within specific channels. So actually your ability to be able to aggregate data across different platforms and use that to triangulate performance is going to become integral.
And obviously we build custom dashboards, I know a lot, which is aggregating all that data together so we get a single view, or the most perfect view we can get of all the disparate data points. Is that going to start to go as well when cookieless comes in and suddenly we can't see across these?
No, so essentially what we're doing a lot of the time is taking data from different sources and then actually visualizing that in a single platform. So we're looking at the channel data, we're trying to pull that in, for instance, from Meta or from Google Ads. Then we're taking data from potentially the CRM and trying to bring that into that world as well. And then we're actually, in a lot of instances, having calls with the sales team, for instance, who are then speaking directly to the customer to understand their objections and also the quality of the leads. when you bring all of that together, you get a far more holistic understanding of how your campaign is performing, because you might not be able to see leads in specific platforms, but they might appear in others. So bringing those sources of data together gives you a far more complete picture.
So we're not talking about the basics of click-through rates, CPL. We're actually going, look at the user, look at the behavior, look at the audience, what are they doing, where are they doing it, and what does that tell us, and how do we then make insightful decisions off the back of that? That's that's not to knock it, but that's not traditional tracking of just what was my CPL.
No, I think if you go back again, maybe 5-7 years, where I'd say digital marketing was really at its peak in terms of our ability to track and measure, within, for instance, Meta, you could actually see someone move through an e-commerce checkout cycle, for example. So you could see them add to cart, you could see them initiate checkout, you could see them purchase or bounce off of that page and ultimately convert. We don't have that same granular level of visibility anymore. So actually, marketers need to be a lot more sophisticated in how they're tracking and measuring campaigns. So taking that more holistic and integrated view is much more important.
So the big question for marketers, obviously getting into ROI, what are the 2 things they can do to start increasing ROI?
Yeah, I'd say as far as influencing ROI is concerned, there's really only 2 levers that you can pull on. The first is to reduce your cost per acquisition, and the second is then to increase the amount that a customer spends either at the point of purchase or once they've actually converted. So then you're looking at things like increasing customer lifetime value. Yep.
Lower acquisition cost or lower CPL. Give us some insight on how do you do that? How do you achieve lower cost per lead?
Yeah, when it comes to reducing your cost per lead, there's 2 ways that you can obviously influence that. So the first is you can increase your click-through rates, and the second is you can increase your conversion rates. So when it comes to your click-through rate, you're looking at how can I improve my creative? So how can I make it more relevant to my audience? How can I get their attention using mechanics or trending features? And then looking at your landing page in terms of increasing conversion rate, you're then looking at things like, has it got a benefit-led headline? Is all of the key information included above the fold? Am I addressing objections on page? And am I including social proof?
So we focus a lot on, everyone focuses a lot on the first one. It's driving traffic to the destination. And like you say, that the creative, the messaging, all of it, we're obsessed with it. The actual conversion point destination, and actually I won't labor on this because I know we touch on it later, but that seems like a neglected sibling that doesn't get enough airtime. But coming on to the second point, you said about generating more money per customer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when it comes to generating more money per customer, I think there's a couple of opportunities that maybe aren't quite so well utilized. The first is having an abandoned cart series. So I think that's a great way, if you're looking to increase marketing return on investment, that you can capitalize potentially on missed sales. I think you should definitely have an email welcome series in place. So that should be an absolute given for any organization. It's a really good opportunity to deepen desire, preference and trust for your product or solution over the course of a 10 to 14 day period with a preset number of emails. And then I'd also then look at what are the segmentation opportunities in your database. So can you potentially cross-sell or upsell based on consumer preferences into other solutions? Because that's a great way of generating more revenue per customer.
So those are the levers that can be applied.
Yeah.
For B2B and B2C, is there a difference? So if we start with B2C, how am I maximising ROI there?
Yeah, I think in a B2C context, you're working with products that obviously are cheaper a lot of the time, small transaction values. And the key factors that you can then start to influence are things like the checkout process, but also the cost at point of sale. So the checkout process, you can obviously look at a bit of bottleneck analysis. How are people moving through that funnel? And can you try and increase its efficiency by optimizing points along the way? The second opportunity is then increasing average order value at the point of sale. So this is where we'd look at maybe bundling best-selling products with some ancillary products to try and increase the total cart value. And therefore, when someone converts, you're going to generate a higher return on your media spend, which is going to reduce your customer acquisition cost.
Awesome. And is that the same for B2B? Obviously, we work a lot with B2B clients. Is there a difference then in B2B?
I think in a B2B context, you're working with products that are much higher ticket a lot of the time. So for an individual to see an ad, be retargeted, and then go straight to point of sale is actually quite a significant ask. Instead, what we try to do a lot of the time is try and create a softer commitment action that's slightly earlier in the funnel, give people a reason to convert, and then utilize nurture as your primary strategy for deepening desire, preference, and trust for the brand and the product. And that's really then your opportunity to try and upsell them on other products or solutions after the fact, or try and then move them to a point of decision where they're ready to buy.
So how do the audience maximize ROI for traffic driving?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to talking about traffic driving, a lot of the time we're referring to the channel itself. So for instance, Google ads or Meta ads. And in that context, if you're trying to improve marketing ROI, you're essentially trying to influence click-through rate. You're trying to maximize the number of clicks that you get for your spend. The two key factors that you could probably play with here are trying to improve the relevance of your ads through developing a deeper understanding of the audience and talking about things that are interesting and engaging to them, or potentially looking at the actual mechanics that you're using. So things like high and fast transitions, or potentially trending features that are going to attract and then retain their attention. I think one thing that maybe doesn't get talked about all that often is when you talk about the channels themselves, actually an ancillary factor to increasing the ROI of those channels is increasing conversion rates. And this is where you can start to actually optimize components on the landing page to generate a higher return on investment.
Yeah, and this is something we tried not to talk about earlier because it could be a subject all in its own right.
Yep.
Conversion landing pages, we're driving all this traffic to it, so often neglected as the little sibling that we don't pay attention to, but you can see huge benefits and reward from actually reshifting your focus onto the conversion landing pages.
Yeah, for sure. I think click-through rate is one of those things that people naturally gravitate towards trying to optimize for, because we talk about the channel as almost the holy grail of marketing. Which platform should I be on? Which new platform is coming next that I need to migrate to? And I think therefore conversion rates get put to the wayside a little, but if your goal is to maximize marketing ROI, conversion rates is an awesome place to focus, in the sense that it's a game of diminishing returns with click-through rate. So at a certain point, you're only going to be able to increase your click-through rates by increments of 0.1, 0.2. And at that stage, you'd be far better off shifting your focus into trying to improve the quality of your landing pages, because even a 0.5% increase in your conversion rate would have quite a significant impact on your overall ROI for the campaign in terms of actually then converting your traffic into sales or leads.
So that was maximizing ROI for traffic driving. How can we look at maximizing ROI for nurture?
When it comes to nurture, I think there are a couple of key opportunities. The first one is having an abandoned cart series. I think that's an opportunity that gets missed a lot. So having a simple email capture where you can pull people into your database and then remarket to them, that's a great way of capitalizing on potentially otherwise missed sales. The second would then be having a dedicated welcome series. So over a 10 to 14 day period, having a sequence of emails that gradually introduce you to the product or solution, start to build desire, preference, and trust for the product, and potentially feature a couple of key testimonials that move an individual towards a point of decision. And then probably the last one would then be looking at segmentation modeling. So looking across your database, understanding what the consumer or prospect preferences are, and then using that as a bit of a white space analysis to understand, well, if they have this product but not this one, or this product but not this service, can I cross-sell or upsell into those to try and increase repeat sales and therefore customer lifetime value?
And a lot of that sounds like it really is an in-depth understanding of your potential customer, the ecosystem that you're kind of funneling them into and taking them on. And at each point, what are they doing? What can we learn? And how do we augment that so that we're getting the best return from them?
Yeah, absolutely.
As we mentioned earlier on, marketing teams are having to do more with less. Not to add to their to-do list, but could you give us the top 3 untapped opportunities where you think they could be focusing on to generate more ROI?
Yeah, I think if I had to recommend 3 opportunities to maximize return on investment, it would be number 1, look at the opportunities to shift to always on marketing. Number 2, look at introducing some softer commitment actions to get people into nurture at a lower cost per acquisition. And then number 3 would actually be look at your customer database and try and understand what the opportunities are to cross-sell and upsell to increase customer lifetime value.
Nice. And picking on the first one, obviously, we've put it on our agenda with pretty much every client that isn't there yet. Always on, it's where everyone needs to be. Do you want to explain why?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of organizations, particularly in the B2B space, that are still operating on quarterly campaign cycles, running campaigns for 90 to 120 days. And all of the creative is being produced up front. It's then being launched in a set and forget style fashion. And they don't then get the opportunity, bar a couple of small adjustments in flight, to really tweak and change the performance of that campaign. So what we're doing with our client set is trying to shift them into an always on mode of operation, where we run campaigns for a full 12 months and we're able to make iterative improvements over time and operate in a far more agile way. So over a 30-day period, we're constantly looking at what new creative can we potentially test? Can we make changes and adjustments to the audience? Across the different platforms and channels that we have in play, can we shift and reweight budget to try and generate a higher return on investment in that 30-day window?
Your next point was the softer commitment action. If you could take us through that.
Yeah, so when it comes to a soft commitment action, a lot of the organizations that we work with, I think they try and optimize for the highest value action that they have. And in actual fact, then they miss the conversion opportunity a lot of the time because the prospects that are coming to the page maybe aren't ready to take that level of action. What we're then trying to do is introduce some slightly softer conversion points earlier in the decision-making journey. So things like a simple email sign up, for instance, to a newsletter, or potentially more middle of funnel style assets like a lead magnet, an ebook, for instance, or a webinar, where we can give them the opportunity to convert, move into email nurture where we can have a slightly deeper level of conversation, but we're still able to acquire the customer at that point, oftentimes for a far lower cost per acquisition than if we were trying to capture them for something like a sales call or a strategy call, or potentially even a consultation.
As the final of the 3 untapped you had was getting more from your customers.
Yeah, so when you look at your database, a lot of the time I think people try and focus on net new acquisition, and there's a lot of untapped opportunity in your marketing database itself. So I'd encourage organizations to take a look across your existing customer set, try and understand what products and solutions they already have, and look for opportunities to cross-sell and upsell. Oftentimes those are the greatest opportunities to try and increase sales per customer and therefore increase customer lifetime value.
So often we focus again, I suppose, on the new and the trendy, the Gen Zs and what they're up to. It's all in TikTok, but actually email is antiquated, a relative relic in terms of a channel to use. But you've seen some phenomenal results in email nurture.
Yeah, a lot of the time organizations focus more on the traffic driving channels as their primary point of focus, but email marketing is really an untapped resource, I'd say, for the majority of B2C and B2B organizations. There was a study done a couple of years ago now that found that email marketing had a 36 times return on investment.
That's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you compare that to the ROAS figures that you're potentially able to achieve from a traffic driving channel, they're just not comparable. So from an ROI perspective, if you can use your traffic driving channels to actually acquire customers at cost or at a low customer acquisition cost, move them into nurture, and then use nurture as your opportunity to then increase customer lifetime value through repeat sales or potentially by moving them into other products and solutions, that's really where the opportunity is to try and maximize that.
Far more cost-effective channel as well to actually create content.
Absolutely.
Karl, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for the advice. Thank you for being with us. If you got to the end and you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, comment, and we'll get back to you, and we'll see you in the next one.